If people insist on writing your story for you, sometimes the only way to take your life back is to finish the ending yourself. The moment my lips met Ryan Caldwell's, the entire hallway fell silent. Hundreds of students froze in place as conversations dissolved into stunned whispers. Phones hung forgotten in trembling hands, and even the fluorescent lights above us seemed to hum louder than before. Ryan didn't pull away. His silver blue eyes searched mine with that same unreadable calm that had earned him the nickname everyone on campus knew by heart, the coldest senior. For one impossible heartbeat, the rumors no longer belonged to them. They belonged to us. Then everything shattered into noise. Someone gasped. Someone laughed in disbelief. A notification chimed from a nearby phone, followed by another and another until the hallway echoed with the relentless rhythm of messages spreading faster than anyone could speak them aloud. I could almost picture the campus group chats exploding before my eyes. They wanted a scandal. They finally had one. Ryan's fingers tightened gently around my wrist, not enough to hold me in place, only enough to remind me I wasn't standing alone anymore. His expression never changed, but I noticed the almost invisible shift in his breathing, the tiny movement only someone looking directly at him would ever catch. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. His voice barely rose above the noise surrounding us. I looked into his eyes and answered with the smallest nod I had ever given anyone. 6 hours earlier, I never would have believed I could do something like this. 6 hours earlier, I was staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, wondering how my life had fallen apart before my first class even started. It began with a photograph, a blurry picture. Me stepping out of Ryan's apartment building just after sunrise, wearing his dark jacket over my wrinkled sweatshirt while rainwater still clung to the sidewalk. Whoever took the picture had chosen the perfect angle. It looked intimate. It looked guilty. It looked exactly like the story everyone wanted to believe. By the time I reached campus, people weren't even pretending not to stare. Conversations stopped whenever I passed. Smiles appeared that vanished the instant I looked up. My phone buzzed nonstop inside my backpack, but I couldn't bring myself to read a single message. Noah caught up with me halfway across the courtyard, breathing hard from running. "Don't check your phone," he warned before I could say anything. "Too late," I answered. "I already know." He frowned. "You haven't even looked." "I don't need to." The whispers were louder than any notification. Every glance carried the same question. Every laugh carried the same answer. I stepped into the communications building, hoping the walls would muffle the voices, but they only echoed them back. My heartbeat grew heavier with every step toward the project studio where Ryan would already be waiting. Last night replayed inside my mind in broken fragments. Cold rain, a pounding headache, the warmth of his apartment after the storm, a clean towel folded across my shoulders, the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the kitchen before sunrise, and Ryan quietly placing his own jacket over me before I left because the morning air had turned colder than either of us expected. Nothing happened that should have become a headline. Nothing happened that deserved strangers deciding who I was. Yet somehow, before the first class bell had even rung, my entire life had already become everyone else's favorite story. The moment I stepped into the communications building, I realized something painful. Rumors did not need proof. They only needed people who wanted to believe them. The hallway was the same place I walked through every day, but it felt completely different. The familiar posters on the walls, the glass doors leading to the studios, the sound of students rushing between classes, everything looked normal. Yet somehow, I felt like I was the only person standing in the middle of a storm. Noah walked beside me, keeping his voice low. "Ethan, you need to tell me what happened last night." I looked at him, but I did not know where to begin. How could I explain a night that was not what everyone thought it was? How could I explain that Ryan Caldwell, the senior everyone called emotionless, had been the one person who noticed I was struggling when nobody else did? Last night started after our film project meeting ran much later than expected. The rain outside had become heavier, and my phone battery had died before I could call a rideshare. Ryan had noticed I was exhausted and offered me a place to wait until the weather improved. That was all. A quiet apartment, a cup of coffee, a conversation I never expected to remember so clearly. Ryan was different when nobody else was watching. The campus saw him as someone distant, someone impossible to approach. But sitting across from him in his apartment, I saw someone who listened more than he spoke. He asked about my designs, my goals, and why I always apologized before sharing my own opinions. I never told him how much that question stayed with me, because nobody had ever noticed that small habit before. Ethan, Noah said carefully, bringing me back to the present. People are saying you and Ryan were together all night. My face felt warm, and I looked away. People always say things, but this time it is different. Noah showed me his phone for only a second. The post had already reached hundreds of students. The caption was cruel, written like someone had already decided the entire story before knowing a single fact. I looked away before I could read more. Who posted it? I asked. Noah hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Nobody knows. I entered the studio and saw Ryan standing near the large windows at the back of the room. He was reviewing the project notes, completely calm, completely focused. For a moment, I felt relieved. Maybe he would explain. Maybe he would say something that would make everything easier. But when his eyes met mine, his expression remained unreadable. Ryan had always been like that. Controlled, careful, impossible to understand. The professor entered a few minutes later and began preparing for our presentation. I sat down, trying to focus on the screen in front of me, but every whisper around the room felt impossible to ignore. Is that him? Someone asked quietly. The one from the picture? Another voice answered with a laugh. I lowered my eyes to my notebook and gripped my pen tighter. I wanted to disappear. I wanted yesterday to stay a private memory between two people who understood what happened. But the world outside had already created its own version. Then Ryan stood up. The room became quiet. Everyone looked at him. For the first time that morning, I thought maybe he was finally going to say something. Maybe he was going to tell everyone the truth. But instead, he simply walked toward the presentation screen and began speaking about our project. Calm, professional, distant. And somehow, that hurt more than the rumors themselves. Because for one second, I wondered if I had misunderstood everything. Maybe last night meant something only to me. The projector hummed softly as the first slide appeared on the screen, but the sound barely reached me over the pounding of my own heartbeat. Every chair in the studio seemed occupied, every pair of eyes seemed sharper than usual, and every whisper felt as though it had been aimed directly at me. I tried to focus on the presentation outline resting on the table in front of me, but the words blurred together until they looked like meaningless lines. Someone's phone vibrated. Then another. A faint laugh rose from the back of the room before disappearing into uncomfortable silence. I did not need to look up to know what they were reading. Ryan stood beside the screen with his usual composed posture, explaining the production schedule as if it were any other Tuesday morning. His voice remained steady, calm, almost comforting in another life. But today, every measured sentence created another layer of distance between us. I kept waiting for him to glance my way, to acknowledge everything that had happened since sunrise, yet he never did. It was as though he had built an invisible wall around himself, one that no rumor could penetrate. The professor nodded approvingly while Ryan outlined our responsibilities for the upcoming campus film showcase. Then my name appeared on the slide behind him. Ethan will present the visual direction, Ryan said evenly before stepping aside. My stomach tightened. I slowly stood, forcing my legs to carry me toward the front of the room. The bright projector light hit my face, making it impossible to see everyone clearly, but I could still feel them watching. I gripped the presentation remote with damp fingers and swallowed hard before speaking. The concept behind our visual design is based on emotional contrast. I began, surprised that my voice sounded almost normal. We wanted to use colder color palettes to represent isolation before gradually introducing warmer tones as the characters begin to trust each other. I clicked to the next slide. My hands trembled just enough for the remote to slip slightly in my palm. The lighting choices are meant to. I stopped. A muffled chuckle interrupted me from somewhere near the back row. Another followed. Someone whispered loudly enough for several others to hear. He knows all about emotional contrast now. A wave of quiet laughter spread through the room. Heat rushed into my face. I stared at the slide without seeing it. The projector fan grew louder. A pen tapped against a desk. A backpack zipper scraped open. My breathing shortened one shallow breath at a time. Noah shifted uneasily in his seat, looking toward the professor as though hoping someone would intervene, but nobody said anything. Then Lucas leaned back in his chair with a sympathetic smile that never reached his eyes. Maybe Ryan should explain this section, he said casually. After all, The two of them seemed to spend plenty of time together outside the project. More laughter followed, softer this time, almost cautious, as though everyone wanted permission to enjoy the joke. I felt every sound pressing against my chest until it became difficult to draw another full breath. My fingers had gone numb around the remote. I looked toward Ryan without thinking, searching for anything that might steady me. For the first time since the presentation began, our eyes met. His expression did not change, but something flickered there for only an instant. So quickly, I almost believed I imagined it. Before I could understand what it meant, the studio door opened behind us. Madison Blake stepped inside carrying her tablet with an expression that looked almost apologetic. "Professor," she said carefully, "I think you should see what someone just posted." The room fell completely silent as she turned the screen toward the front, and the moment I caught a glimpse of the image glowing across her display, I realized the worst part of this day had not happened yet. Madison hesitated for only a second before placing her tablet on the front desk where the professor could see it. I could not read every word from where I stood, but I recognized the photograph immediately. It was the same blurry picture from that morning. This time, however, someone had added another image beside it. It showed the lobby security camera from Ryan's apartment building. The timestamp placed us inside the building for nearly 6 hours. Beneath the two pictures, a single sentence stretched across the screen. They did not stay because of the storm. They stayed because they wanted to. A heavy silence settled over the room. Nobody laughed anymore. They simply stared at me as though the internet had already decided the truth. The professor frowned and looked around the studio. "Who is circulating this?" he asked. Nobody answered. Lucas slowly lifted one shoulder. "Everyone has already seen it," he said. "People are just talking." The words sounded harmless, but they landed like stones inside my chest. I tried to explain. "That is not what happened." My voice barely carried across the room. Someone near the back muttered, "Of course he would say that." Another notification echoed from a phone. Then another. I could almost hear the rumor growing with every vibration. The projector continued humming behind me. The air conditioning clicked on overhead. Chairs shifted across the floor. Tiny sounds became impossibly loud until they blended into one endless wave pressing against my ears. I looked toward Ryan again, silently hoping he would stop this before it reached a point where nothing could be repaired. Instead, he stepped forward and faced the professor with the same calm expression he always wore during meetings. "Professor," he said evenly, "Ethan and I are not in a relationship." Every word was clear. Every syllable reached me before anyone else reacted. The sentence was true. We were not together. We had never called whatever existed between us a relationship. Yet hearing those words in front of everyone felt like watching the floor disappear beneath my feet. My stomach tightened until I thought I might be sick. I lowered my eyes because I could not bear to see anyone else's reaction. The whispers returned almost instantly. "See," someone said. Even he denied it. Lucas let out a quiet breath that almost sounded satisfied. My fingers had gone completely numb. The presentation remote slipped from my hand and struck the floor with a sharp plastic crack that echoed through the studio. Every head turned toward me. I bent down automatically to pick it up, but the room tilted before I could reach it. My breathing became shallow. The bright projector light blurred into pale streaks across my vision. I could no longer separate voices from the mechanical hum surrounding me. I only caught scattered words. Picture. Apartment. Liar. Scholarship. Senior. My heartbeat drowned out everything else. I took one step backward, then another, trying to find air that no longer seemed to exist inside the room. Noah stood halfway from his chair, calling my name, but his voice sounded impossibly far away. I reached the doorway without remembering how I got there. The hallway outside looked empty compared with the crowded studio, yet it offered no relief. I leaned against the wall, closed my eyes, and tried to steady my breathing the way I had been taught years ago, but nothing worked. The memories from the previous night collided with the humiliation of the present until I could no longer tell which feeling hurt more. Then I heard the studio door open behind me. Calm footsteps crossed the hallway without hesitation. Before I turned around, I already knew exactly who they belonged to. The footsteps stopped a few feet behind me, but Ryan did not speak right away. He had always understood that silence could be kinder than questions. I kept my eyes closed, trying to steady my breathing, but every breath caught halfway in my chest before it could become a full inhale. The hallway felt strangely empty compared to the chaos inside the studio, yet the whispers still echoed through the walls as though the entire building had learned my name for the wrong reason. Ethan. Ryan's voice was quiet, steady, and unmistakably close. Look at me. I shook my head without opening my eyes. Please, I whispered. Not right now. Instead of arguing, he took one slow step closer. Then just listen. I felt his presence beside me, calm enough to slow the frantic rhythm inside my own mind. Breathe in for 4 seconds. His voice remained even. Hold it. Now breathe out. I tried to follow the count, but my lungs refused to cooperate. My fingers trembled against the cold hallway wall. Ryan did not rush me. He repeated the rhythm exactly as he had the night before while rain hammered against his apartment windows. For seconds in. Hold. For seconds out. Gradually, the sharp pressure in my chest eased just enough for air to return. When I finally opened my eyes, Ryan was kneeling slightly so that we were almost at eye level. His expression was still composed, but there was unmistakable concern behind his pale blue eyes. You remembered, I said softly before I could stop myself. You remembered how to help. I remember important things, he answered. The words were simple, yet they carried more warmth than anything he had said all morning. I looked away again. Then why did you say we were not in a relationship? For the first time since I had met him, Ryan hesitated. He exhaled slowly before answering. Because if I had confirmed anything in that room, the conversation would have stopped being about rumors. I frowned, not understanding. It would have become an ethics investigation. He continued before I could respond. The faculty committee has been reviewing leadership policies for student projects since last semester. If they believe the project leader was involved with someone on the team, they could remove one or both students before asking any questions. My thoughts struggled to catch up with his explanation. Ryan met my eyes again. I was protecting your place on the project. I stared at him in disbelief. You could have told me. Not in front of everyone. His voice remained calm. Every word spoken in that room would have been repeated. Across campus within minutes. Almost as if to prove his point, another notification echoed from somewhere farther down the hallway. Ryan reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out his phone. The screen lit up with a series of messages arriving one after another. He glanced at them only briefly before locking the display again. The rumors are changing, he said quietly, which means someone is feeding new information. I looked at him, confused. What do you mean? The apartment photo was one thing, Ryan replied. The security camera image was something else entirely. Those came from different sources. My heartbeat slowed for a completely different reason now. You think someone planned this? I do not think. His gaze shifted toward the studio door. I know. Before I could ask another question, Noah hurried into the hallway, stopping as soon as he saw us together. His face had lost all color. Ryan, he said, struggling to catch his breath. Someone just uploaded another post. He swallowed hard before looking directly at me. This one claims they have proof about what happened inside the apartment last night. Noah held his phone so tightly that his knuckles turned pale. He did not even need to show me the screen. The fear on his face was enough to tell me whatever had just been posted was worse than the photograph. Ryan reached for the phone first. His eyes scanned the display for only a few seconds before his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. It was the first crack I had ever seen in his perfect composure. It is fabricated, he said quietly, handing the phone back to Noah. Someone edited ordinary details into something they were never meant to be. I finally looked at the screen. The anonymous account claimed to have inside information from someone who had been inside Ryan's apartment building. It described a story that sounded dramatic enough to spread quickly, but vague enough that nobody could verify it. There was not a single piece of actual evidence attached. Only confident words designed to sound believable. Yet the comments below had already accepted every sentence as fact. I felt my stomach sink again. Why would anyone do this? I asked. Ryan looked toward the window at the end of the hallway where sunlight spilled across the polished floor. Because people rarely question a story that confirms what they already want to believe. His answer lingered in the silence between us. I remembered sitting in his apartment the night before while rain covered the windows in silver lines. The memory no longer arrived in broken pieces. It unfolded slowly, one honest moment after another. My clothes had been soaked from walking across campus without an umbrella. Ryan had handed me a clean towel before disappearing into the kitchen. When he returned, he He placed a warm mug of coffee in front of me without saying anything. We had spent nearly an hour talking about classes, films, and the strange pressure of always trying to become someone impressive before graduation. At one point, I admitted that I constantly worried about disappointing people. Ryan had looked at me for a long moment before saying something I could not forget. You spend too much time earning approval from people who have not earned your trust. Nobody had ever spoken to me that honestly before. I remembered laughing quietly because his observation was painfully accurate. Later, when the storm became even stronger, the power flickered for a few seconds. I startled without meaning to. Ryan noticed immediately. He never laughed. He never asked unnecessary questions. He simply sat beside me until the lights stabilized again. There had been no dramatic confession, no reckless decision. Only two people sharing an unexpectedly peaceful evening while waiting for the weather to clear. When sunrise finally arrived, Ryan insisted that I borrow his jacket because the temperature had dropped overnight. That ordinary act of kindness had somehow become the center of a story neither of us had written. Ethan, Ryan's voice pulled me back to the present. Do you remember exactly what happened? I nodded slowly. Every minute. Good. His expression became focused again, the same expression he wore whenever he solved a difficult production problem. Then nobody can rewrite your memory for you. I searched his face, finally understanding something that had been hidden beneath his quiet nature all along. Ryan had never been emotionally distant. He had simply chosen actions over speeches every single time. Before I could answer, his phone vibrated once. He looked at the message, and for the first time that day, a faint, almost invisible smile crossed his face. We have our first real lead, he said. The person behind the anonymous account just made a mistake. Ryan slipped his phone back into his pocket and looked at Noah with the quiet confidence that had been missing all morning. Do not tell anyone about this yet, he said. If the person behind the account realizes we noticed the mistake, they will disappear before we learn who they are. Noah nodded immediately. What did they do? Ryan glanced toward the empty hallway before answering. They uploaded the latest post exactly 30 seconds after a private scheduling update was sent to only one small project group. I frowned, trying to follow his reasoning. Ryan continued. The anonymous account repeated information that had never been public. Whoever wrote that post had access to that message. My heartbeat slowed as the pieces began fitting together. So the person is someone inside the project. Yes, Ryan answered. And they wanted everyone to believe the rumors before anyone could question them. Noah looked stunned. That means somebody we work with planned all of this. Ryan did not respond immediately, but his silence felt like confirmation. We left the hallway together and climbed the stairs to the rooftop terrace overlooking the campus. The afternoon sky had finally cleared after the previous night's storm, but puddles still reflected the sunlight across the concrete. A cool breeze carried the scent of wet pavement, and for the first time that day, the constant noise from inside the building faded into the distance. Ryan rested his hands on the metal railing and stared across the campus without speaking. I joined him a few feet away. The space between us was small, yet it still felt filled with everything neither of us had managed to say. I was angry, I admitted quietly. When you said we were not in a relationship. Ryan nodded once. I know. I thought you were pretending last night never happened. He turned toward me, his expression softer than I had ever seen it. Last night mattered. Those 3 words settled into my chest with unexpected warmth. I searched his face, waiting for him to continue. Do you remember what happened before the power flickered? He asked. I closed my eyes for a moment. Another memory surfaced with surprising clarity. I had been sitting on the couch, exhausted after weeks of pressure from classes and the film project. Without realizing it, I had confessed how afraid I was of never being good enough. I remembered saying that every compliment felt temporary because sooner or later people always found a reason to change their minds. Ryan had listened without interrupting. After a long silence, I had leaned my head back and laughed at myself for saying too much. You did not laugh, I whispered. No, you stayed. Because you needed someone to stay. I opened my eyes again. Why? His answer came without hesitation. Because I wanted to. There was nothing dramatic in the way he said it. No grand confession. Only quiet honesty. Somehow that made it impossible to doubt. The distance between us no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt safe. I realized then that the warmth I remembered from his apartment had never come from the coffee or the dry jacket waiting by the door. It had come from the way Ryan noticed small things everyone else ignored. Before either of us could say another word, the rooftop door opened behind us. Noah stepped outside, breathing quickly after climbing the stairs. "I think we have him," he said. Lucas just asked 3 different people whether anyone had figured out who was running the anonymous account. Nobody else even knew there was something to figure out. Ryan and I exchanged a silent look. For the first time since the rumors began, we were no longer reacting to someone else's story. We were finally close to uncovering the person who had written it. Ryan did not rush downstairs after Noah spoke. Instead, he stood quietly for a few seconds, watching the sunlight ripple across the puddles left behind by the morning rain. "People who create stories like this usually make one mistake," he said. "They become too eager to know whether everyone believes them." Noah nodded. "Lucas has been asking questions all afternoon that nobody else would think to ask." I looked from one of them to the other. "What do we do now?" Ryan turned toward me, and for the first time that day, there was no hesitation in his answer. "We stop running." Those 3 words landed differently than anything else he had said. Since sunrise, I had been trying to explain myself, trying to defend a version of events that strangers had already decided was false. Every step I took had been another attempt to escape whispers that only seemed to grow louder behind me. Ryan was right. Running had never changed the story. It only allowed someone else to keep writing it. We returned to the communications building together. Students still gathered in small groups throughout the hallway, their conversations fading the moment they noticed us walking side by side. A few phones lifted almost automatically before lowering again when Ryan met their eyes with his usual calm expression. Nobody dared approach him directly. Inside the project studio, the professor had postponed the presentation until later that afternoon. Most of the team remained in the room, pretending to organize equipment while secretly watching every movement around them. Lucas looked up the instant we entered. His expression shifted almost too quickly from surprise to polite concern. "Ethan," he said, standing from his chair. "I heard you were not feeling well. Are you doing better?" I studied him carefully. Earlier that morning, I would have believed every word of his concern. Now I noticed how quickly his eyes moved from me to Ryan, measuring our reactions more than listening to my answer. "I am feeling much better," I replied. "Thank you." Lucas smiled, but something about it seemed forced. "That is good to hear." Ryan walked past him without saying a word and placed a folder on the professor's desk. "Before we continue the presentation," he said calmly, "there is something everyone should understand. Anonymous posts are not evidence. Edited screenshots are not facts. If anyone has questions about project responsibilities, they should bring them to me directly instead of spreading speculation." The room fell silent. Nobody argued. Nobody even looked away. Ryan had not accused anyone. He had simply reminded everyone that rumors were not the same as truth. I realized that was exactly why his words carried so much weight. Lucas crossed his arms casually. "I think everyone is just curious," he said with a small shrug. "People talk." Ryan met his eyes without changing his expression. "Curiosity asks questions. Rumors decide the answers first." The sentence lingered over the room like a challenge nobody wanted to accept. I watched Lucas for only a moment longer before something finally became clear. He was not worried about me. He was worried that Ryan no longer sounded uncertain. He was worried because the story was slipping out of his control. At that exact moment, Noah's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, then immediately looked toward Ryan. Without saying anything, he quietly turned the display around. A campus technology administrator had replied to Ryan's earlier report. The anonymous account had logged in using the university network only minutes before posting the newest rumor, and the login location matched a single editing suite reserved for our film production team. Ryan looked at me with complete certainty. "Now," he said softly, "we do not need another rumor. We only need the truth." The studio remained silent long after Ryan finished speaking. Nobody reached for a phone. Nobody whispered. For the first time since the rumors began, the room felt uncertain, as though everyone had suddenly realized they had been listening to a story instead of searching for the truth. The professor accepted the report from the university technology office and carefully read the information before looking across the room. "Until this review is complete," he said calmly, "I expect everyone to stop discussing anonymous claims and return to the work we are actually here to do." No one argued. Lucas lowered his eyes for only a moment before forcing another polite smile, But it looked different now. It was no longer confident. It was cautious. Ryan remained beside the professor's desk, saying nothing else. He had never needed the loudest voice in the room to be heard. As students slowly gathered their notebooks and equipment, I realized something unexpected. The whispers had not completely disappeared, but they no longer controlled me. I had spent the entire day trying to erase a rumor. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that my own voice mattered too. I took a slow breath and stepped forward before I could lose my courage. "Everyone," I said, my voice steady enough to surprise even me. Conversation stopped again, but this time I did not lower my eyes. "You have every right to ask questions. You do not have the right to invent answers for someone else's life." The room remained completely still. I continued. "Nothing that happened last night was shameful. A senior student helped me when I needed support after a difficult evening. That is the truth. Everything else came from people who decided a photograph was more important than reality." I looked around the room and noticed several students quietly putting away their phones. Some looked embarrassed. Others simply looked thoughtful. Whether they believed me or not was no longer something I could control. What I could control was whether I stayed silent. Ryan walked toward the door, clearly intending to give me the space to finish on my own. Watching him turn away made one thing suddenly become impossible to ignore. Every time I had needed someone that day, he had been there. He had protected my place on the project. He had helped me breathe when I thought I could not. He had trusted me enough to let me find my own voice instead of speaking for me. I crossed the room before I could talk myself out of it. "Ryan." He stopped and looked back. The hallway outside the studio had filled again with students changing classes, and dozens of curious eyes naturally drifted toward us. I remembered the photograph that had started everything. I remembered the fear that had followed me since sunrise. Then I remembered something Ryan had told me in his apartment. "You spend too much time earning approval from people who have not earned your trust." I smiled for the first time. "All day, they started the story," I said clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "But they never got to decide how it ends." I reached for his hand. Ryan looked at me with quiet surprise, then gently intertwined his fingers with mine without the slightest hesitation. Nobody spoke. Nobody laughed. The silence felt completely different now. It was no longer filled with judgment. It was filled with expectation. Ryan's expression softened into the faintest smile as he held my gaze. "Are you sure?" he asked one last time. This time my answer came without fear. "Completely." Together we walked down the hallway side by side, leaving the rumors behind us one step at a time. Just before we reached the exit, Ryan's phone vibrated. He glanced at the message, and the warmth disappeared from his eyes. The screen showed only one sentence from an unknown number. "You solved the first lie. You are nowhere near the biggest secret."